In this section, we're going to talk about the NAPALM config replace operation. So previously, we had talked about NAPALM and Ansible for doing a merge operation. Now we're going to be talking about a complete configuration replace. So we're going to be replacing configuration 1 with configuration 2. So let's go ahead and look at a playbook. So here we have a playbook. We have host PyNet router 1. We're once again using the NAPALM install config module. Now notice here we've toggled replace underscore config to be true, so we're no longer doing a merge. We're now doing a complete configuration replace. We specified our source config file, which is just going to be the inventory name. So in this case, pynet-router1.text. And once again, we're going to be generating a diff. And right now, we are not committing the changes. We're going to just see which changes are going to be pending. So if we go and look at this PyNet Router 1 config, you can see that it's a full configuration. So here I have a 233 lines. Now, there's some nuance here as far as how do you obtain the initial configuration that you're going to load onto the box. If you obtain this config from an existing device, don't try to do a show run and then copy and paste that output. Instead, try to either secure copy the file off the box or use some sort of Python program that grabs the output of show run. You're going to run into some issues if you just try to directly copy and paste the output. One thing that can be particularly problematic is the self-signed certificate. And there's some other things that are going to cause some issues with just trying to grab the running output. One other thing to be careful about is when you do show run, it's going to say a couple lines at the top like building configuration. You need to make sure you remove those lines and just start with the initial comment and go all the way to the end line. So we have this full config. Let's go ahead and run our playbook, generate the diffs. Now right now we are not doing a commit, so all it's going to do is generate the diffs for what the changes that it sees that are pending. Now behind the scenes on iOS, this is going to be SCPing a file up onto the box into the file system. So in this case, into the /: file system. It's then, with the diff, it's going to be generating a diff between the file it SCP'd up and the running config. And then ultimately, when we commit the config, it would actually be doing a configure replace operation at Cisco IOS to swap in the new config. Now, if we go ahead and look at the pending changes, we see we're changing our logging buffer to 50,000. We're changing the console logging, i.e. we're enabling the console logging, and then we're going to remove this BGP configuration. So if we use netmiko grep and we look at BGP, we can see how router 1 is currently configured. So it currently has some BGP configured. Now if we go into our replace, we toggle commit changes to be true and re-execute our playbook. Hopefully we're going to see those changes occur. Now while that's going on, let me stage a couple of other devices. Still doing our install config. So here in a minute, we'll then expand this to do a complete configuration replacement for an Arista switch, for the Juniper SRX, and for a Nexus device. So now let's look at our current BGP configuration now that that configuration replace is done. And now we no longer see any BGP because we removed it with our config operation. Now let's expand on this and make it be PyNet router 1, one of the Arista switches, the Juniper SRX, and this NXOS1. Now I'm going to do the commit change as false. Now if I look at my configs, you'll see I have a config for NXOS1, PyNet router 1, PyNet switch 1, SRX1 as well. So I have those starting configs. The Juniper and the Arista were pretty straightforward. I could pretty much just grab the configuration for those devices. I did that actually using an SSH channel to get the configs from the box, and then copied that SSH, that config that had been SSH'd off via Python, and used that as the starting config. NXOS1 was more challenging. I had to make a checkpoint on the box, and then I had to do a show checkpoint all command on the checkpoint that I saved, and you had to add the all because you needed the defaults as well. It was actually quite a pain to get the NXOS1 config initially right, so that would be the process I would recommend. And then you have to figure a way to transfer that checkpoint off the box without it getting modified. So if I just did a copy and paste, there was a couple of lines that got modified because there was a line wrap and a new line, an additional new line was added. Now, and once again, you can look at this and see that these are full config files. So NXOS1 is a pretty long config file. It has over 1,000 lines in it. If I look at SRX1, you can see we have 257 lines, and PyNet switch 5, the Arista switch, is going to be the smallest by far, but it is an entire configuration file. Now we go back here, just double check that we're doing commit false, so we're not committing any changes. Go ahead and execute our playbook. We see it's running on those 4 devices. Now once again, remember, since we're using NAPALM, the transport is totally different for each one of this. NX API for Nexus, eAPI, netconf, and SSH. And now you can see we have 3 of the platforms are all identically correct. And actually there was a change to PyNet router 1. So let's go look at what that PyNet router 1 change was. And the logging console got set back. So it looks like it's going to modify the logging console. And I'd have to dig into that some more as far as why that happened. People are making changes on these behind the scenes, so it could have been a change that someone else had made. So we might need to look into that one in a second. But let's actually look at how the current console logging is on that. So that would be my first suspicion, is that somebody just changed the logging console config. Okay, so it does look like logging console is configured. It's actually a default that way. It's going to show up as no logging console if it had been modified. Okay, so now let's go ahead and make some mods to a couple of these. So let's go ahead in nxos1.txt. And I think I have a VLAN interface in here. Let's go ahead and get rid of these 2 VLAN interfaces. And then, oh, for grins, let's say in the juniper, let's just change this logging size to 240K. Once again, we'll go ahead and re-execute our playbook. Once again, we are not committing anything at this point. We are just generating diffs. Okay, and let's go ahead and look at our diffs. Alright, so we see PyNet switch 5 is correct. Nexus 1 is going to remove those two VLAN interfaces. PyNet router 1 is going to do the logging console, and I think I understand what's going on there. I'll comment in that in a minute. And then the SRX1 is going to swap in this new file where it's changed that. Okay, so now let's go ahead and toggle this to be true. We are now going to commit our changes, re-execute our playbook. It's now installing the configs. It's installed it on NXOS1, so it should have removed those two VLAN interfaces. There it's installing the change in PyNet router 1. And then finally it's installing the change in SRX1. Now let's do netmiko grep on, try VLAN on NXOS1. So now it only has interface VLAN 1, so it's removed those two other routed VLANs. On SRX1, we can see that that archive size is now 240K. And then let's look at the logging configuration of PyNet router 1. So I think that is actually correct. The logging console is a default, so it should not be here. So since we're doing a full configuration swap, if we want to enable logging console, it would look like this. If we want to disable it, it would look like that. Let's go ahead and swap that in, re-execute our playbook, and now we should see NXOS1, the Arista switch, and SRX1 are all correct. PyNet router 1 should actually make this change. and then we'll verify that change with the netmiko grep command. So the general point is that you can use the configuration replace operation to completely load in new configurations. These new configurations could have been generated from templates, and the NAPALM interface provides you with very good abstractions for how to accomplish this. Now let's just verify that one last thing with our logging configuration on that console. And now we see that we do have the no logging console. And then I would expect if I reran my playbook, I would be able to verify that all 4 devices are now in the proper configuration state.